Good to almost see everyone again. I would like to build a bit on last week, although I know that there were several that were not here last week. So it's not, you don't have to have heard last week in order to be able to be engaged in tonight's subject. But the one thing that I will bring up from last week is this, and that is that Harambam, Maimonides, he writes that the fast days that we engage in as a population, as a nation, are not just commemorative, which means that our fast days are not simply commemorating or reliving something that happened far back in history. What Harambam says, the way that he presents it is that the fast days we fast are because there are issues that created the problems, and that those issues still are issues with us today. So he's not simply saying that there are things that happened in our past that we mourn. What he's saying is that there are endemic elements of our people, that there are things about us in our past that we haven't completely worked out yet. And the fasting is in order to be able to bring our attention to those things. Why fasting? Because if we're not having lunch, we're wondering why we're not having lunch. And any time that you hear that the Hachamim want us to remember something, they always say don't eat. So it's don't eat before you light the Hanukkah candles. Don't eat before you pray Musaf. Don't eat before you say Kiddush. Don't eat before you say Sfirat Omer, and so on and so forth. And that's how they ensure that one will remember if they know the law. So the don't eat on a fast day is pay attention to the day. There's something important about the day that we have to be aware of. So coming up to Tisha B'Av, tonight is Rosh Chodesh Av, we start the 9 days tonight. As we look towards it, we want to look at some of the earlier issues, some of the earlier elements that happened on this day, even before the Beit HaMikdash. And one of the things that occur, one of the issues that occur, is that, or the major thing that occurs, is that we refuse to enter into Eretz Yisrael, yes? At least according to our Mesorah, according to our tradition among the Hachamim, the Talmud, the report of the Miraglim comes back on Tisha B'Av. And there's a decree by God that because we chose to cry for no reason on that day, we will travel 40 years in the desert. Yom Lashana, it says. A day, for every day that the spies traveled through Eretz Yisrael, spying out and coming back to say that it's no place for us, certainly not anywhere we want to live, a year for every day, you will travel through the desert. Yom Lashana, Yom Lashana. We're not going. You're not going in. And not only are you not going in now, but during those 40 years, very graphic wording in the Torah, Kadosh Baruch Hu says, you will drop dead. Literally, that's the language that he uses. Over those 40 years. So the people hear this, and they start to rethink whether they were right in rejecting entrance into the Aretz. And what they say is, never mind, we'll go. We change our minds. It's fine. And Moshe says, I don't advise that. Not a good idea. God's not interested. We've changed the program. It's a whole new issue. And they say, no. We realize we were just a little out of it last night. It's all fine. We're going to go up. And they all try. There's not all, but there's a whole bunch of people that try, actually push their way through from the south. And they are pulverized. That's actually the word that's used in the Torah. Vaiketum, that they pulverize them by the Amalekim and others. Ad Horma. So I want to think about that whole response. That's what I like to focus on tonight. What happened? And does this kind of thing happen? And what do we learn from this? So they hear that Eretz Yisrael is not a place for them by the spies. And their first response is what? What's their first response? We're not going. It's not for us. We're not interested. Now this, mind you, after leaving Egypt, knowing that this is what they're going to do, They receive the Torah knowing that this is what they're going to. God says to them, the only reason I'm taking you out is to bring you into this land. You're a cherished nation to me. You're a mamlechet kohanim v'goy kadosh. I love you like crazy. We're going into this land. I've set it aside for you, flowing with milk and honey and so on and so forth. And their response is, it's not for us. We're not going in. They hear that the next 40 years are going to be murder, literally, and they respond and say, okay, never mind. We'll change our mind. We'll be able to go in now. And you would think that, all right, we put a scare into them. They've changed their minds. It's time to go in. Why would that change of mind the next morning, so to speak, be a problem? Why wouldn't God accept that they realized the error of their ways, turned around 180 degrees, and decided to go in? And instead maintains his stance and says, they can go in, I'm not with them. There's a new program and a new system running over here. Why is that not an option? In other words, why is the opposite of what I was thinking last night no longer an option for me? It's not an option anymore. And what is it about the human psychology that runs at extremes? Because that's what we were dealing with, basically. There was, on the one hand, an extreme of there's no way we're going in there, it's not for us, and an immediate 180-degree turn to, yes, it's fine, let's all go in, we made a mistake. For some reason, the recognition of mistake is not happening. God doesn't accept that they recognized anything. I need your help a little bit with this. I want to hear from you, if you will, why doesn't God accept the 180-degree turn? Yeah.
Well, first off, did they even recognize their mistake, or is it just, okay, I realized the second option, never mind, I'm going back to my first?
So that's a question. Did they really recognize their mistake? And if not, what's prompting them to change their minds? I mean, if it's not the mistake that they recognize, something's causing them to change their mind. What's causing them to change their mind?
They're acting out of fear either way. It's out of fear of the fact that the Meraglim are telling them they're going to die.
Right.
Or they're saying, Hashem is telling us we're going to die. There's no difference. They're still hearing from a source that they're going to die, which installs fear in them.
Right.
So the source of fear is changing, but they're still acting out of fear. There's nothing changed in them, internally.
Yeah. Does that ring true to you? What do you say?
Didn't the people not want to go to Israel because they thought if they went to Israel they wouldn't be able to work for God as well, because there'll be so many more distractions, whereas in the Midbar there was no distractions. So maybe it was more the fact that they weren't trusting God to tell them to go to Israel, because nothing really changed. It's not that they don't think that they're not going to be able to uplift God anymore in Israel. They think they could do better in the Midbar. So them just switching just happens to be because they're getting punished now. That's one thing I would assume.
So you're saying it's not fear?
No, it was fear.
It was fear.
Yeah.
So you were agreeing with the element of fear?
Yeah.
You're just saying what was the impetus for the fear?
Yeah.
Okay. So then let's take the common denominator. Because maybe that's the issue, maybe this is the issue. I mean, I'd like to go with the surface, and that is what the Pesukim say. And what the Pesukim say is that they were scared of being pulverized by nations in Eretz Canaan that were going to basically eat them alive. And they actually say this. They say, we looked like grasshoppers in their eyes. So let's draw that common denominator and question the idea of fear. So I'm asking you, does that ring true? In other words, is it a plausible explanation for extremism? Because that's what we're dealing with. We're dealing with extremism. We do not have, in this story, a population of people that are interested really in taking problems as they come and responding to them. We have a population of people that are based in fear and therefore like a ping pong ball running from one end to another. In an instant, yes.
Well, there's also, the reason for the fear might be a loss of trust because they don't know what they're getting themselves into. Moshe came to them in the desert. They don't know who he is. They don't know who the God is because they've been slaves.
Do they not know who he is?
They've been slaves for so long.
Do they not know who Moshe is?
they're not sure where to go from there.
Okay, and so that means that they have a problem trusting God, and they have a problem trusting Moshe. Yes?
Which I think instills fear.
Which instills fear. Good. But we will agree that there's fear.
Yeah.
Okay. So there may be many things that create fear. One thing that isn't here is courage and bravery. Yes? There's no courage and there's no bravery. And you think that from their willingness to run in and run up is because, okay, we made a mistake, we're afraid of the other end of it, so we'll at least put ourselves this way, because if we're going to weigh our fears, the fear of dying in the desert for 40 years and wandering all over the place, waiting to see where God's going to take us, as opposed to going in the first option that seemed to be good once upon a time, outweighs the other. So it's just a question of what I fear more and how I respond to it. So let's think about fear for a minute. Because fear consumes us. Fear is a very deep part of what it means to be human. As a matter of fact, it's a very deep part of what it means to be an animal on this planet. And why is that? Why is fear so deeply ingrained in us and so primal? Where does fear occur in our brains as far as we know?
Instinct?
Very much in terms of instinct. The aspect of the brain that we call the amygdala. The amygdala, they call the oldest part of the brain because it's the part of the brain that we share across species down to the reptiles. So the one aspect of brain that reptiles have is analogous to our amygdala. For that reason, scientists, biologists call the amygdala, the aspect of our brain, the lizard brain. And that part of our brain is responsible for instinctual response. The part of us that doesn't think. The part of us that just does in face of stimuli. So it is responsible for fight, flight, procreation, and feeding. That is what the amygdala deals with. Those are basic, primal instincts that we share across the animal kingdom practically. Why is fear so much a primal, ingrained element in us? Why do you think?
Survival.
Survival! Of course! It's all, at the end of the day, a question of survival. All you have to do is watch one National Geographic special and you realize that it's the one thing that runs throughout the entire animal kingdom as far back as you can go in history, and that is, am I going to live or aren't I? Will I be able to eat today or won't I? Is my shelter sufficient or am I going to be eaten by the predator? And if you're a hunter-gatherer, then you're a person or you're an individual that is concerned about being able to get the food that you need for the energy that you need in order to live without being killed. It is deep-seated in us, that fear. Can you be free if you are governed by fear? Can you be a free person? No. Because freedom means that you expose yourself to the uncertainties of life and you own your responsibility to make choices in response to those uncertainties. I'll repeat that. Freedom means that you accept responsibility. Responsibility literally means the ability to respond. When you have the ability to respond, you have responsibility. And that means that you are relied upon to make decisions against unforeseen realities. Yes?
Right.
That's what it means. You are then free. If you choose to relinquish that freedom, you relinquish responsibility, you relinquish your capacity to respond to unforeseen circumstances in reality. And where do you then live psychologically? In fear, but you don't want to live in fear all the time, so what protects you from it? At least you think protects you from it. Extremes. Because why are the extremes safe? Think about this. You have to think about this carefully. Why are the edges safe? Yes.
They're predictable.
Predictable. Excellent. Because they're predictable. Because I will always know what an extremist thinking will respond. Because they toe the line all the time. So in other words, the caricatures that we have running for presidency, yes? Regardless of what you think of them, whether you're ready to vote for one or another or neither or whatever it is, it doesn't really matter. The bottom line is that we've got on stage in front of us are, for all intents and purposes, caricatures of real people. What do I mean real people? Real leaders, because they're running for the presidency of the United States, one of the most powerful positions in the world, if not the most. Which means leadership by definition. And if you are the leader of what they call the free world, I'm only using this as an example, I'm not making a political statement, but it's a close example, we're all watching it in front of us, crash and burn before our eyes. So if I am looking to take the office of leader of the free world, and I'm not the one who coined that phrase, that means that I am leading freedom in the West. Which means that I have to be an individual, at least on paper, that is the granddaddy of responsibility. I need to be an individual that is capable of responding to unforeseen circumstances and never hiding in the extremes because it's predictable. But you think about who we've got in Republican sides and Democratic sides today, if you're paying any attention at all, and who's in the middle? Who isn't hunkering down and digging their heels into far extremes where you can anticipate any given situation, any question, any interview, what a typical Republican and a typical Democrat is going to respond? Yeah? Can't you predict? Are we ever really surprised by any of the answers that are presented? No. Should we be? Yes. Why should we be? Because if I am surprised by a response that isn't anticipated, it means someone's thinking. And they're not running by their lizard brain. And that is why HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, I'm not accepting the 180-degree turn. As you said, nothing's changed. Who said? You said. You said. Nothing's changed. It's the same thinking in different forms. It's the fear that's running. It's just a question of how it's manifested. So we see from this source that Tisha B'Av has a great deal to do with the issue of living in extremism. In where I am not being vulnerable, open, free, responsive to a very chaotic world. Instead, I've already made up my mind. Regardless of which extreme I've made it, I've made up my mind. And you will watch this if you know anybody who's at all extreme. This is not some fantasy world we're talking about. You will find extremists all over the place today. It's very interesting that it's a very strong trend nowadays. That's for another talk. You'll think about it. Go home. Think about why is that happening today? But what I want to think about with you tonight is that what I want to be? Is that what you want to be? Because to deny that place is to deny courage, bravery, thought, and ultimately your own freedom. There's no two ways about that. And so the question then becomes, where do I identify extremism? Can I predict what particular groups of individuals are going to say in any given situation? And is that me? If it is me, do I want to stay there? If it's not me, how do I maintain the strength of being free? And make no mistake, it is one of the most difficult things to be in this world. Free, responsible, and courageous. Big words, noble words, not easy words to live by. Why does it require courage? Because it means that while those primal fears are nagging at you, and they always will, because they're deep inside, they go way back, that you find some aspect of yourself, whether you want to call it your spiritual self, your connection to God, your prefrontal cortex, whatever you want to call it. I call it the Spirit of God. You draw on that to know that your fears can be subsumed by your sense of value and meaning. And then you choose. You own your freedom and your responsibility. And you respond instead of doing what everybody knew you would do simply because you're in a particular group. And that is what we fast. One of the major things we fast for on Tisha B'Av. Because we lost our capacity to be courageous and brave and think. So you might call it walking the line. Because it's a tightrope to live that way. And you know what else? It takes a great deal of energy and stamina to live that way. Why? To live responsive and free. Why? Why does it take a great deal of energy and stamina? Yes.
Unpredictable.
What is it?
Unpredictable.
And therefore?
You have to work hard to face challenges.
Yes. You always have to be on. Because you're not on autopilot. You're driving. You're thinking. You're responding. So on the one hand, it means you always have to be learning because it what feeds your capacity to think. You have to be in the know because it feeds your capacity to think. And then you have to think. And that takes effort. And then you have to be responsible with your thinking possibly being incorrect and making a wrong choice. And who owns the responsibility of the wrong choice? I do. But the question becomes, do I prefer to own the responsibility of the wrong choice, but having it been my choice and my responsibility, as opposed to relinquishing it to someone else and something else, just as long as I'm not wrong? These are big questions. And these are questions that are so serious that literally today, we have nobody that is willing to run for office that isn't a caricature and completely predictable. It tells us something about what we need and how we need to respond. It tells us, at the very least, something about our own lives. And it doesn't only happen on the national scene, does it? It happens very close to home. Religiously, socially. We always ask ourselves, what kind of person am I? Am I this? Am I that? Do I belong here? Do I belong there? And why do we ask ourselves those questions? Why do we want to belong in a group?
Identity. Comfortable.
It's human nature. It's identity, comfortable, human nature, all of those things, and all of them have a deeper common denominator, and that is fear of not belonging. Because when you are a human being and you are a social animal, as we are, if you don't have a social context, then what? You're in trouble. And these things are so deeply ingrained in us, we don't even think about it. We just do it. We fast so that we can think about it. We stop so that we can contemplate to what degree it is that I'm actually doing. So walking the middle, so to speak, or walking the line, is the hardest thing, one of the hardest things that we have to do as human beings. But it's the only thing that a free human being can do. Because we don't do that, we're no longer free. We relegate ourselves to the confines of certainty, of pre-tailored answers, of security in knowing that I belong, but I relinquish my capacity for freedom, bravery, and responsibility. And so as we come into our adulthood, and as we own our own individuality and freedom, those are the questions that we deal with. And they are some of the hardest because they've been running for a very long time, all the way back, 3,000 years, if not more. But it is what makes the difference between a free person, a brave person, and a responsible person, and somebody who ultimately stays at the edges in the safety zones. Question? Yeah.
By me relinquishing my freedom and my responsibility. Okay.
Where's the mic?
By me relinquishing my freedom and my responsibility, how does that affect my relationship with Hashem?
That's a good way. How does it affect your relationship with God?
Yeah. Like,
How does it affect your relationship? Well, let's think about it in terms of relationships in general before we talk about that. When you're involved in a relationship, any relationship, where you have to be loving, caring, do you need to be responsive to the other individual? Do you? Do you? Yes. Which means that you cannot have a regimen of how you engage in the relationship if it's going to be a real thriving relationship. And why is it that I cannot have a regimen and I need to think about and respond to the person? Why? Why is it a problem, for example, that I bring my wife flowers every Friday and say Shabbat Shalom for the rest of my life in my marriage? I don't know. Does she like flowers? Let's say she does. But that's what I do. Why could that potentially be a problem? Yes?
Because at some point there's no thought involved, it's just a routine.
Yeah. Because at some point, I don't even wait to see whether she smiles when she gets them, whether it means anything to her or not, whether it's a value, whether I'm showing at all that I'm sensitive to what it is that she needs, what she wants, what she likes. In order to have any real relationship with any human being that has a pulse and a mind of any capacity, I need to be responsive. I need to sense what that person is feeling, thinking, going through, and respond. Do I not? At least on paper. Isn't that what a good relationship sounds like? But so many relationships don't work. Or they have issues for this reason. Because either one side, the other side, or both are hunkering down into habit. And this is what we do. This is how I talk. Sorry if you don't like how I talk. Do I speak in an adult relationship in a way that you can understand me? That you feel and understand and accept the words that I'm saying? Or do I say what I want to say? What is the adult way to act? What is the responsible way to act? And what's the childish way to act? And the irresponsible way to act? So if that's the case with any relationship, my relationship with God is absolutely no different. Am I paying attention to what God is doing? Am I sensing where the world is moving? What things are happening to me in my life and adjusting in response? Or do I know what God wants? And I've got God on my side. And I have it all down. I mean, I learned Shulchan Aruch. I know exactly what God wants me to do. Nothing more needs to be said. I don't have to wake up and do anything anymore. I go through my routine. And if I have a doubt, Mahmir. I just stringent. Better not to. That's all. And isn't that what a Humrah does? I'm not saying Humrot are all a problem, but trends of Humrot are a problem. Why are they a problem? It keeps me from having to respond, doesn't it? Safe. I just step away from the line, 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 until finally I'm so far away from the line, I'm completely disengaged from anything meaningful. You know what my favorite example of this is? On the holiday of freedom, which is what? Pesach. There's one aspect of Pesach where God, I'm convinced, sits up there laughing, loving it. And that is that we have to eat matzah on Pesach. Can't get out of that. And it is the most dangerous thing that you will ever do on Pesach. if you care about Pesach and the laws. Why? Because you've got people that are scraping down their entire home, making sure, God forbid, there should be no aspect that even sounds like chametz in their home. And yet, they need to sit and eat this cracker that is made from potential chametz. All it needs is another minute and it's over. It's curtains. You understand? It's fantastic. It's the most unbelievable thing in the whole repertoire of Chagim, in my opinion. That you can literally eradicate all chametz from your house, but the one thing that you're eating Pesach night might be an Isur Karet. Yeah? Because the only thing that can become matzah is something that can become chametz. You can't make quick quinoa matzah. That doesn't work. You need to make it out of something that's going to become chametz. And you got to take a risk. You got to walk the line if you're going to be free. So you can get rid of everything else, but you're going to eat that matzah, and you're going to walk the line, and you're going to take your life into your hands when you do it. It makes all the difference. So that's what happens with you and God if you decide not to engage and take responsibility. You don't respond. And so that means that it doesn't matter what God does or what says or what's going on in your life or whatever it is. You got the answers. It's all figured out. And you run. Yeah.
You mentioned that it's a very difficult feat to achieve freedom.
Yeah.
And many philosophers, especially Plato, argue the fact that almost no one could achieve freedom, and that's why only the people that can achieve freedom, like Plato's allegory of the cave, the people that could venture out of the cave and achieve freedom, those are the people that should be running a government. So coming from a person that lives in a democratic society, how am I supposed to trust a nation that majority of us aren't free and are extreme?
Well, thank God we've moved on from Plato a little bit. You know, I mean, Platonic ideas are valuable and they are the underpinnings of philosophy. But we've moved a little bit further. And the thing about Plato is that he believed that things were extremely fixed in their existential reality. He didn't give a great deal of option for growth and development. And we've thought about that, and we've had some pretty good thinkers since Plato, and we tend to believe that there is room for growth, certainly spiritual growth. The Greeks had no concept really of spiritual growth. I mean, I'm saying that in a very broad sense. When I am a leader, and I am leading towards freedom, I look to Moshe Rabbeinu, I look to Thomas Jefferson, Lehavdil Elef Abdalot. And I see in those people that were not only free in and of themselves, but motivated the population towards freedom in many modes. One of which was rhetoric. Rhetoric is more than words. Rhetoric is the art of speech. So it is the words used in the format they're used, in the order they're used, the cadence of the sentences. And all of a sudden you hear "we the people." And if you're an American, all you need to hear is those three words, and you're moved by it. You should be moved by it. And maybe you have to travel outside the United States of America to understand why those three words that open one of the most important documents in recent history means so much. Because it was never "we the people." It was always "you the people, follow me the leader." And so there was a vision, the same way that Moshe Rabbeinu said, "Anachnu, ele po, kulanu hayom." You, me, we, all of us here, living today, saying to the people, you have in front of you ha'hayim ve'amavet, life and death, ubaharta b'hayim, choose life. The choice is inherent in his words. It's not a question whether the choice is something you have. That we know you have. The question is, what do you choose? That's 3,000 years ago. That's Moshe Rabbeinu talking to a people before he dies. It's the founders of this country saying, it is us. It's about us and our destiny. It's about us and our lives that we own and that we are responsible for and that we will choose. And so there comes a time that in the course of human events, as they write, that it is necessary to break ties, break bonds with governments that we had ties with before. That we understand that we are created with certain unalienable rights. God-given. Revolutionary ideas. But it motivates a soul. It encourages a people. And that's where we moved on from Plato. And where we recognize the soul in man that is capable of being ignited, excited, responsive, and looking for destiny. And that's unmistakable. Yeah.
Back to the Megargim. So if we weren't able to go there because fear was the problem, why were we ever allowed in Israel? Because fear never left, ever.
That's not true.
When did it leave?
Massive difference between 40 years later and 40 years before.
They still had fear.
First of all, you had a whole bunch of people drop dead.
Okay.
Which were slaves. Which were not prepared to get out of slavery. They may have been prepared to walk out of their cage, they were not prepared to walk into freedom. So the population that you have that walks into Eretz Yisrael 40 years later is not the population that you have that decided not to go in 40 years before.
Yeah, but they
It's
still
the
have
children
that
of
fear.
those people that are growing up in a completely different paradigm.
So they weren't just scared of anything?
We're always scared. The question is, what do we do with our fear? And so am I stuck and paralyzed by my fear, or do I become conscious of it and overcome it? You don't take the fear away, per se. People that are courageous and brave, it's not that they don't have fear. It's that they do something about it. And they don't become paralyzed by it.
So then that should have been enough to go in at the very moment where they said we should go in
No,
now.
because, as he said, they hadn't addressed their fear. It was just a fear that was guided in a different direction. What they were doing was running away from 40 years of wandering, not running towards freedom. And that's a very important difference. Yeah.
On like a lower scale for us, if we were created to follow our instincts and everyone in
Who
our
said
everyday,
that you were created to follow yours?
because then why do we have them?
They're survival instincts. Is that all you're meant to do in your life, is survive?
No.
So there you are.
So
Yeah.
sorry.
That's quite all right.
So what's the real benefit in our everyday life of not going to the extreme if the extreme is comfortable for us?
Do you have a life that you want to live?
Yeah.
Do you have a sense of yourself and something that you can accomplish as an individual?
Yeah.
Do you need to make choices to accomplish those things? If you relegate yourself to comfort and extremes, what are the odds that you'll achieve what it is that you dream for yourself to achieve?
You probably won't.
That's all. Way in the back.
If you had to pick an extreme in this community, which extreme?
Oh, you want to ask that question? Go ahead.
And how would you stay off the edge also, like staying in the middle?
To me, it doesn't matter what side of extreme the extreme is. If it's extreme, I stay away. I try anyway. So it doesn't matter whether it's a religious extreme, whether it's a social extreme, whether it's a psychological or philosophical extreme, I'm not interested. So I imagine that you could think of examples of all three. Religious extremes happen on either side. A lot of times they talk about it in terms of hats, don't they? Color of hat. Beware of any hat. Because if you can anticipate, this is your litmus test. If you can anticipate how someone is going to respond to a religious question, then you know that they are living on the ends. Doesn't matter what color hat they're wearing. Really doesn't matter. Neither is better. Because both are suffering from the same syndrome. And that is, they've lost the capacity to respond. Am I generalizing? Yes. Are there gray areas? Yes. Go for the gray. So if it's a question of social, where do you fall in the social structures of the community? Are you on this side? Are you on that side? Are you that kind of SY? Are you that kind of SY? Where am I spending my summer? Do I stay? Is it fathomable that I shouldn't be in Deal for a summer? and so on and so forth. You understand? I mean, this causes people nervous breakdowns. It's something to think about. Has nothing to do with religion. It has to do with social situations. Can I see myself making a choice for myself in the best interest of myself, or am I going to succumb to what it is that is done without thought? And so it is a template. Use it as a template in your life. Apply it to wherever it is that you see. Yeah.
In a situation with your relationship with God, how do you suggest being responsible since it's not really tangible? And you can't really respond.
Does it need to be tangible?
Not really, but if you're comparing it to a relationship with the person,
Are those tangible?
more than your relationship with God.
More? Okay, so it's a spectrum.
Yeah.
All right. Very, very rarely tangible.
Yeah.
All you need is a tone of voice, and you realize, I mean, sometimes it gets to be that sensitive. One emoji that comes out that's not the right emoji, and it's all over. It's a fight for 3 days. And I'm not kidding.
Yeah, but how do you suggest walking?
God has tone of voice. He has emojis. He has all kinds of things that are put out into a world. The only question is, do you sense it or not? And that's really an issue. And people think that this is laughable. It's not laughable. It's a question of, am I responsive to reality? What is God but expressing reality? I mean, if we don't realize that, then we maybe have to have a discussion on who God is. It's not for tonight. But if it's real, and if it's true, it's an expression of God. And I take my cues. So I never have God in my pocket. I never know that I've got him down 100%. I am always wondering where he's going. Always. And questioning my responsiveness and the decisions that I've made. And am I on a track of reality or not? This is why I wrote about this week. That's why at the end of the journey for 40 years, all of a sudden we start talking about Nidarim. Vows. And what are the Akamim? How do the Akamim deal with Nidarim? Got to be Matir Nidarim. It's the most crazy thing. There's like no source in the Pasuk for it. And all the Achamim say about the Nidarim is make sure that you don't make them, and if you do make them, run to get out of them. That seems nice, keep your word. Whatever happened to keep your word? Yeah, your word's not that important. In what sense? Your word is always going to be a mistake at one point. You can't have said something that is so emphatically true that it never hits a situation where it now needs to be examined and recalculated. So you better find somebody on the outside of the nice little reality that you created for yourself to get you out of the damn reality, because otherwise you're stuck in there forever. You hear what I'm saying? Yeah. Excuse me for saying damn. Yeah, go ahead.
How does one deal with the fact that constantly being responsive can sometimes feel ingenuine?
Why?
Because sometimes when you're responding to someone, you feel that there's one thing that you should be doing, sort of like an extreme, and there's also something that you feel like you want to be doing, but you do the right thing, even though it might not be how you feel you want to be acting.
You're bringing up a very important issue. Which,
Rabbi?
I'm going to try and repeat your question and tell me if I got it right, okay? Your first name again?
Erwin.
What Erwin is saying, as far as I understand him, and he will correct me if I'm wrong, is that it's possible to be so responsive that you lack a genuine element to yourself, or perhaps more accurately, an integrity. Because if your whole person is responsive to externals, what ends up happening is you don't really have a consistent self that is core, because you're constantly responding to externals. Is that essentially what you're saying? Okay. Do you know what we call that in human relationships? Codependency. And it's a danger. We all are at risk for it. Codependency is a broad issue, but codependency usually manifests when I define my behaviors based on another person's actions. That's not what I'm saying. It's not what I'm talking about. I'm glad you asked that because it has to be clarified. A very major element of freedom is a sense of self that is intact and has integrity. Integrity means that it's integrated. That the different elements, I don't know, the different elements of myself, this must be saying we shouldn't be recording, right? The different elements of myself are integrated into one whole identity. And that the responses that I make draw from my sense of self and being and worth. So I need to develop that. It's very important for me to have a sense of self-value, self-worth, and so on. When I have that, or I sense that, I respond based on my knowledge, my understanding, my sense of being, and I will either choose to engage, not engage based on that. When that's void, I am terribly at loss, and I become codependent, which means that I become dependent on another's actions for everything that I feel and do. And that's something that we ultimately have to be very careful about. But it is a risk. It is a risk. But it's also an addictive element of the human psyche. Yeah, which we won't get into too far, but it's an addictive element, which means that in and of itself it's an extreme. Because it's not really thoughtful. When I get into that point, I'm not thinking about my response. I'm responding based on what you do only. I'm not pausing to see, okay, you did this, what does it mean to me? And that's what needs to happen in a free, responsible person. Right?
So how do you develop that sense of self?
The better question is, how do you not lose it? Because we're all born with it. And it's usually pulverized at some point in our life, repeatedly. So it's a big issue. And that, I don't know if it's worth opening the entire can now for that. I gave a shiur on this earlier this week, which is recorded. But it has to do with this whole issue. Because what do the Meraglim say when they go in and come back? What do they say? What was the perception? They looked like insects. And they say two things. They say, we were insects. We felt like insects. That's how they saw us. And you know what the Gemara asks on that? Very simple question. It says, how do they know that that's how they saw them? That's what you think they think about you. So it meant that they came out of that with a terrible sense of self-worth and self-esteem. There were only two people that had a proper sense of worth and self-esteem. And who were they? Caleb and Yoshua. And what does it say about them? It says one thing about them that they had in common. They had ruach. It says about Caleb, ruach acheret hayta imo. It says about Yoshua, ish asher ruach bo. They had a soul. They had a sense of the presence of God in them. They had a sense of existence. These people felt like insects. They felt like human beings with dignity and strength and integrity. And so Caleb responds and says, I don't know what they're talking about. We absolutely can go in and take it. So the better question is, how do you not lose it? Because we're born with it. It's why when you look at a child, you see a child's eyes shining. Because they don't withhold their being until they are taught to withhold their being, which nowadays becomes earlier and earlier. All you have to take is one test and it's all over. You get one bad grade on a test and it's all over. Now we're in jeopardy, of being able to maintain that sense of worth. So it has to go deep in and be able to sense the element of ruach that you have in you, that is very real and very there, and understand that it is who you are. So this is something that honestly it requires a little bit more developed to answer. How do you have that? How do you do that? How do you maintain that? But not for tonight. It's probably only because I don't want to cheat. It's a very, very important issue. Are we done? Yeah. Okay, we're done.
On behalf of the SCA, I want to thank Rabbi Dweck for speaking again tonight on us. My goal and my hope is that the topics that he brought up and the issues that he brought up tonight are a source of conversation for you, not only tonight, but also tomorrow, over the weekend with your friends, and build upon the issues that he brought out.